Hello there, VK3ZVX here. This unit is a Marconi CR100/8. It's a naval receiver built somewhere between about 1940 and 1950. It's a little bit hard to tell precisely when, but the fact that it's a /8 suggests that it's a later build rather than an earlier one. It's pretty massive for its size. Very nicely constructed, as is all Marconi equipment. The dial is quite interesting. It's got a tumbling dial, so to speak. So there's as you change the frequency range, the scales tumble forward or back, depending which way you want to look at it. And the tuning is quite precise. It's got a fine tuning control and a coarse tuning control, and quite a nice action on it, although it feels like it could use a little lubrication. Internally, the lid's a little stiff. It's got a bit of corrosion on the hinge there, but internally, I know you can't see it from this angle, but it's all there. All the vacuum tubes are in place, all the links are in place, and there's no sign of any damage or any sign of tampering at all. It's really quite in good condition. There is, however, a blown fuse down on the bottom of the chassis there, which I suspect is involved in the HT. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. But there's a 500 milliamp replacement fuse sitting just up here. I might leave that one where it is. It's a part of the original radio, and it looks a little corroded, so we might leave that there as an artifact. Just going around the control panel, the HF gain control, which is an RF gain control presumably, pass band filter selector from 100 for CW around to 6 kilohertz for AM. The band selector switch just there, which seems to work and needs a little lubrication. The tuning is fine. The aerial trimmer capacitor, it seems to rotate fine. The BFO control is fine. The low frequency gain, which is the AF gain, it feels like it could use a little WD-40, but apart from that it seems to be all right. The mains on-off switch, the action on that seems to be quite positive, but the mode selector switch, the movement there is the dial, or rather the knob moving on the shaft, not the shaft moving in the switch. This appears to have seized up, so that's going to make the radio quite difficult to operate unless it's attended to. I suspect that it's just a bit of surface corrosion inside the shaft of the switch itself. Hopefully that's all it is. Just turning our attention for a moment to the rear. This is a mains operated radio, and it's been fitted with a standard Australian 3-pin mains plug. Now, the entry point for the back of the radio for the mains plug is somewhat unconventional, to put it simply. I'm pretty certain it's not meant to look like that. How it is meant to look is not quite clear, but we can investigate that a bit further. Now, when I took the bottom panel off, this is it here. One of the first things I noticed was that there are traces of wax right along this edge. Now that's not tropicalized. It's got too many holes in it for it to be sealed up against water ingress or anything like that. So this is not to do with keeping water out of the thing. This has got to do with something leaking wax inside. Now that's a pretty fair indication that the high voltage capacitors inside this radio are going to need attention. Not unusual for a radio of this age, but this is a pretty strong indication that it's something you don't want to sort of try the radio first, you might wind up with a nasty surprise. So there's a large glob of wax just there, which gives an idea of where the capacitor might be. And there's another one over here, which suggests that it's not just one capacitor which is leaking. There's probably a few of them in there, and they may all well need replacing. There's also traces of organic material. Now, precisely what that is unlikely to be known again anytime soon, but I did find what appeared to be something like a caterpillar or a worm or something of that nature in there. That's been removed and found its way into the bin. So if we turn the radio on its side, and follow the mains cable, we can see that the unconventional nature of the installation or the modification continues inside the radio. So the cable can be simply, with a very small amount of persuasion, fed through the entry point, and we find that this is the connections to the active and the neutral lines, and these haven't even been put into a terminal strip. They've simply been twisted together and taped. Now, that does not pass muster, and so that will be one of the first things that I look at after I've sorted out the capacitors. This capacitor here appears to be the one that's doing all the leaking. It's directly over one of the high spot in the wax there, so that's got to be that one. And it's near what appears to be the 5Y3 high voltage rectifier, so it stands to reason that that's in the high voltage circuit. There's another one just here, which could be its mate, and there's another wax capacitor just in here, which appears to be located very close to the other large blob on the base plate. So that will require a little bit of investigating too. There are some smaller wax capacitors down in here. I'm just giving them a cursory inspection. They seem to be intact, but I'll inspect them a bit more thoroughly as we get into this. The other thing that I notice is, apart from the odd bit of cobweb here and there, the only problem I can see is this sort of powdery corrosion that you often see in old radios. It's not exactly everywhere, but there's a fair bit of it. It's probably it might be aluminium oxide, or it might be some other kind of oxide. But it's powdered and it's just all over the place, so that might be a job for some printed circuit board spray, or just to clear the chassis of any debris like that. I don't think it's conductive, but you never know. And if we go back to the top of the radio, as I said, there's a bit of corrosion on that hinge, so it might need a bit of lubrication as well. But there's a fair amount of the same kind of powdered surface corrosion, particularly on the body of the tuning capacitor. And it's a 4-stage tuning capacitor. That's probably going to need a bit of a flush out. So I would think that in order to do that job properly, it's probably necessary to remove the chassis from the shell so that you can gain access to everything. I don't think that's a particularly big job. There are a few screws on the front panel here, and then the body appears to sort of unscrew from around the edge and around the bottom of the chassis, and I think all of that just comes away. The manual seems to indicate that the chassis can be extracted, so and there's no wiring onto the body onto the shell as such, so it's reasonable to suggest that that can be pulled out of there without too many dramas. Whether or not the shell needs to be touched up is a bit hard to say. The internal paintwork is in quite good condition. The external paintwork, as you might expect, is, well, could use touching up here and there. It'd be good to get rid of some of the corrosion, especially along the hinge here, but I guess we'll just have a look at that as we get further into it. All in all, a very good prospect for a restoration. One interesting thing is that this sticker obviously is not original. It reads Radio Moscow, and well, it's got Radio Moscow in Cyrillic in the centre here, followed by the CCCP, which is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, but in Russian, or USSR in Russian. So given the age of this radio, and the fact that it's a Western radio, one's tempted to think that someone was poking a bit of fun at someone else. This radio would have been in use during the Cold War era. So putting a Radio Moscow sticker on it is, I'm not exactly sure what it means, but it's possibly somebody thumbing their nose at somebody else. Anyway. Okay, so that's the introduction to the Marconi CR100/8. Thank you for watching. I'll post another video when I've got some more information and a little bit of progress on the project. 73s, VK3ZVX, clear.